Good morning. I'm going to wait just a minute or two to hopefully see some of you tune in. Oh, I've got one person tuned in. I'm just going to give it a minute or two, is what I just said, just to see if anyone else tunes in. Oh, 2 people. 3 people. 4 people. 5 people. That's good. And remember, after this, we are going to do our Zoom conference. So that would be great to see everybody again. I know I haven't seen some of you yet. People I haven't talked to yet. I haven't talked to Brody. I haven't talked to Andrew. I haven't talked to Emma. Who else haven't I talked to? I don't think I've talked to Zach yet. So hopefully if you're watching this, or you can message your friends and tell them to join us in Zoom. Okay. All right. So we ended where Gilly was teaching WE how to fight. Okay. And I think my favorite part of this is when WE was swearing because we know that Trotter, Gilly calls her a religious fanatic, right? So we know that just had to just boil her blood. Okay. But she realized that Gilly was actually helping WE, and she was very happy about that. So this next chapter is called The Visitor. The week before Thanksgiving, Mr. Randolph came down with the flu. It wasn't a bad case as flu goes, but he was an old man, and any kind of sickness, as Trotter said, was harder on the old. So with many rest stops for Trotter to recapture her wind, she and Gilly brought the rollaway cot down from the attic and set it up in the dining room, turning the never-used room into a sick room for Mr. Randolph. There had been a great discussion as to whether his big lawyer son should be notified. Mr. Randolph was sure that if his son knew he was sick, he would be snatched away to Virginia and never to return again. Trotter recognized this appalling possibility, but maintained that there was some moral obligation to inform next of kin when one took to one's bed. So Mr. Randolph does not want his son to know because he's scared that his son will make him move to Virginia with him. Suppose he just shows up one day and finds you sick, then he won't trust you no more. He's sure to take you away then. But Mr. Randolph thought it was worth the risk, and they had compromised by having Mr. Randolph move in, so Trotter could keep a close eye on him. What happens if you die on me? I promise not to die in your house. You have my solemn oath. Gilly, if he looks peaky, we carry him next door as fast as we can go. I ain't going to be sued by no big Virginia lawyer. Mr. Randolph raised up off the rollaway. If I die on you, you can sue me, Miss Trotter. You can take me for every cent I have. He lay back, giggling and gasping. Every cent? You won't even have no Social Security if you're dead. Better not die. That's all I gotta say. I promise not to die. But with these 2 beautiful ladies nursing me, I may decide to remain ill for a long, long time. Well, that's a chance I gotta take, beautiful as I am. But if you ain't well a week from today, you're gonna miss out on the turkey and stuffings. So Mr. Randolph swore a solemn oath to be well by Thanksgiving. As it turned out, he was a little better. But by then, both Trotter and William Ernest were now down with the bug. Trotter fought going to bed, but her fever was high, and she was too dizzy to stand up. Despite her protests, Gilly stayed home from school Tuesday and Wednesday to nurse the three of them, and Thanksgiving Day found her exhausted from going up and down the stairs and from bedside to bedside. It occurred to her that if she could get sick too, no one would blame her for collapsing. But of course, she didn't catch anything except irritability from not sleeping and worrying. She called Mr. Randolph's doctor, Trotter's doctor, and the pediatrician, but no one gave her any help. The patients were to stay in bed and take aspirin for the fever. So now W.E., Trotter, and Mr. Randolph are all sick, so Gilly's taking care of them. And remember, when we met gruesome Gilly in the beginning of the story, I never would have thought she'd be taking care of somebody. Gilly chopped an aspirin in half with the butcher knife for W.E. One piece flew out of sight under the stove, and the other piece, which she got down the boy's throat with little to no difficulty, came up again promptly, along with the bowl of soup she coaxed down earlier. She was afraid to try more aspirin. So that means W.E. is throwing up. Trotter told her to wipe his face, arms, and legs with a cold cloth, which seemed to help the fever a little. But the child was still miserable, and clean as she might, the smell of old vomit hung in the room. The whole house was a mess, in fact. Even rooms like the living room and kitchen, which nobody but she went into, began to look as though they had been bombed. She was simply too whipped to even pick up after herself. By Thursday, she couldn't have cared less about Thanksgiving. The turkey Trotter had bought was relentlessly defrosting on the refrigerator shelf, but there was nothing else to remind her as she sat at the kitchen table, dressed in jeans and a shrunken t-shirt, chewing her late breakfast of a bologna sandwich that the rest of the nation would soon be feasting and celebrating. So, it's Thanksgiving, and everyone's sick but Gilly. The doorbell rang. She jumped at the sound. Her first fear was that the lawyer's son had not believed Mr. Randolph's excuses for not coming to Virginia for Thanksgiving and had come to get him. Then, with annoyance, she realized it was probably Agnes Stokes sneaking around to find out why Gilly skipped school for 2 days. But when she opened the door, it was a small, plump woman whose gray hair peeked out from under a close-fitting black felt hat. She wore black gloves and a black overcoat, which was a little too long to be fashionable, and carried a slightly worn black alligator bag over one arm. The woman, who was an inch or so shorter than she was, looked up into Gilly's face with a sort of peculiar expression. Whether frightened or hungry, Gilly couldn't have said. At any rate, it made her shift uncomfortably and push at her bangs until she remembered two of Trotter's trusty sentences for emergency use and offered both of them. "We're not buying anything today, thank you, and we're faithful members of the Baptist Church." She hurried to close the door. "No, wait," the lady said. "Gladriel Hopkins?" Gilly yanked the door back open. "Who are you?" she blurted out, as awkwardly as William Ernest might have. I'm It was the woman's turn to look uncomfortable. I, I suppose I'm your grandmother." Somehow, Gilly would have been less surprised if the woman had said fairy godmother. "May I come in?" Dumbly, Gilly stepped back and let her. Imagine how Gilly feels right now. This woman claiming to be her grandmother. The sound of snoring poured forth from the dining room. Gilly willed the woman not to look, not to stare at a funny little brown face poked up above the faded quilt, the mouth trembling with each noisy breath. But of course, the woman looked, jerked her head slightly at the sight, and then turned quickly back to Gilly. "Gilly, honey, who is that?" Damn it, Trotter must have heard the bell. "Okay, Trotter, it's fine, I got it," Gilly yelled as she tugged at her shrunken t-shirt, the last half-clean one, and tried to make it cover her belly. "Want to sit down?" she asked the visitor. "Yes, please." Gilly led the way into the living room and backed up to the couch, sticking a hand out toward the brown chair. Plunk! They both sat down in unison, like string puppets, the lady right on the edge of the chair so that her short feet could touch the floor. So the woman was bobbing her little black hat. Did anyone in the world even wear hats these days? So Gilly was trying to take it in. This little old lady, this old-fashioned hat and coat, was Courtney's mother? In all Gilly's fantasies, Courtney had never had a mother. She had always been like existing before time, like a goddess of perfection. I'm right, aren't I? You're Gladriel? Her voice was southern but smooth, like silk to Trotter's burlap. Gilly nodded. My daughter, the woman fumbled in her purse and brought out a letter. My daughter left home so many. She snapped the purse shut and raised her eyes to meet Gilly's puzzled one. She left home so many years ago. I, my husband, and I never. I'm sorry. Helplessly, Gilly watched this little woman stumbling for words, trying to tell a painful story, but not knowing how. My husband, she tried to smile, your grandfather died nearly 12 years ago. Perhaps she should say something, thought Gilly. Geez, that's too bad, Gilly said. Yes, yes, it was. The woman was pushing hard against the words to keep from crying. Gilly knew that trick. Oh boy, did she know that one. I tried to contact Courtney, your mother, at the time, of course, but I was not able to. In fact, the pitch of her voice went up. She stopped trying to talk and took a handkerchief from her purse, barely touching each nostril before putting it away. Go ahead and blow, honey. It'll make you feel better. That's what Trotter would have said. But Gilly couldn't quite get it out. As a matter of fact, the woman had recovered herself enough to continue. As a matter of fact, this letter, this letter is the first direct words I've had from my daughter in 13 years. You're kidding, said Gilly. She felt sorry, even though the woman's pain didn't have anything to do with her. I, I never knew that she had a bit. Wouldn't you think she'd want her own mother to know she had a baby? This was obviously the point where she, Gilly, was supposed to come into the story, but it still seemed far too remote, like something that had happened once to a friend of a friend. She tried to nod in a sympathetic manner. Gilly, I called you and called you. W.E. stood clutching the doorway for support, his face still flushed with fever. He was dressed in his long, grayish white underwear. At the sight of a stranger, he stopped dead. So we know that Courtney's mother, Gilly's grandmother, had no idea Gilly even existed. Courtney never told her. And I see Reagan said her grandmother might also be a bit surprised too, and I think she is. I think she's equally as surprised. The woman looked at him once hard, and then, as she had done with Mr. Randolph, she looked quickly away. I'm sorry, W.E. Gilly said. I didn't hear you call me. What's the matter? As soon as she asked, she knew. His long johns were all wet down the front. Gilly jumped up. Excuse me, I'll be right back. She hustled the boy back to his room as fast as you could hustle a boy who was still weak from fever and lack of food. It was hard to be patient with him on the stairs. You shouldn't have come down, W.E. You're sick. I wet, he said softly. I couldn't help it, she sighed. I know. When you're sick, you just can't help it. She got him the last clean underwear, which was short and wouldn't be as warm, and changed his sheets. She took a dry blanket off her own bed. He climbed in and was back to her at once. his strength exhausted. Gilly, honey, Trotter called down drowsily as Gilly passed her door. You got company down there? Just playing the TV. Gilly smoothed her hair and tugged again at her shirt as she went down the stairs. She knew she looked a wreck. She must have shocked the poor old lady right out of her socks. The woman gave a weak smile and nodded when Gilly came in. You poor thing, she said. Gilly looked behind to see if W.E. had followed her down. Bless your heart, there was no one else around. Me? Courtney didn't exaggerate. I'm just so glad you wrote her, my dear. How could they have put you in such an awful place? Me? What was that woman talking about? What place? I know I shouldn't have burst in upon you like this, but I felt I had to see for myself before I talked with your caseworker. Will you forgive me, dear? Forgive me for. There was a heavy thump, thump, thump on the stairs. Both of them sat stark still and listened as it drew nearer. Oh, the little lady gasped. Swaying in the doorway was a huge barefoot woman in striped men's pajamas, gray hair cascading over its shoulders, a wild look in its eyes. I forgot. It was moaning as it swayed. I forgot. It grabbed frantically at the woodwork. I forgot. Gilly sprang to her feet. What did you forget, damn it? The turkey. Trotter was almost sobbing now. $15.38, and I let it go to rot. She gave no sign that she noticed the visitor. Nothing's gone to rot. I would have smelled it, wouldn't I? Gilly couldn't help sneaking a sideways glance at the little woman who looked almost as frightened as W.E. did when he spied a new word in his reading book. Go back to bed, Trotter. I'll put it in the oven. The huge woman made an effort to obey, but nearly fell down just trying to turn around. I better sit a minute, she panted. My head is light. Gilly grabbed the back of striped pajamas with both hands and half dragged, half supported her toward the couch. But she knew, just as one knows when piling on the final block, the tower will fall. She knew they couldn't make it. Oh, mercy! Trotter gave a little cry as she came crashing down, pinning Gilly to the rug underneath her. The woman there, flapping on her back like a giant overturned tortoise. Well, I've done it now. She gave a sort of hysterical giggle. Squished you juicy. What? What is it? The third nightcloth actor had made his entrance. You all right, ain't you, Gilly, honey? Asked Trotter. And without waiting for an answer, "'Sright," Mr. Randolph said. But someone fell. I heard someone fall. Yeah, I fell all right. Trotter was rocking her huge trunk in a vain effort to get to her feet. But it's okay, ain't it, Gilly, honey? Just roll, Trotter, said a muffled voice. Roll over and you'll be off of me. What's that? What's that? Mr. Randolph squeaked. It's poor little Gilly. Trotter grunted and with a supreme ah rolled onto the floor. Miss Gilly, he was asking anxiously. I'm okay, Mr. Randolph. Gilly got up, dusted herself off, and took him by the hand. Let's get you back into bed. By the time she returned from the dining room, Trotter had somehow hoisted herself into a sitting position on the couch and, dizzily clutching the cushions with both hands, had found herself face to face with a white-faced stranger. You said no one was here, she accused Gilly. The visitor, for her part, was teetering on the absolute brink of the brown chair in what Gilly took to be a state of total shock. But the small lady proved capable of speech. I think I'd better go, she said, standing up. I don't seem to have come at a very good time. Gilly followed her to the door, eager to get her out of the loony bin house that had suddenly become. I'm glad to have met you, she said as politely as she could. She had no wish for the woman to think poorly of her. After all, she was, or at least, she claimed to be Courtney's mother. The woman paused, resisting Gilly's efforts to hurry her out the door. She reached over abruptly and pecked Gilly on the cheek. I'll get you out of here soon, she whispered. I promise you I will. Fatigue had made Gilly stupid. She simply nodded and closed the door quickly behind the little form. It wasn't until she had gotten Trotter back in bed and was putting the turkey in the oven that the woman's meaning came clear. Oh my God. Well, it didn't matter what the woman thought. Miss Ellis could explain about today. No one could make her leave here, not when everyone needed her. Besides, Trotter would never make them take her. Never, she said. Never, never, never. If you remember right, remember when Gilly was writing her mother, Courtney, and she told Courtney that she was in this religious fanatic's house and everything was horrible. I'm assuming Courtney told her mother, and then now her mother showed up, and Gilly's probably really, really regretting that she did that. Okay, I'm going to end this now, and I'm going to send you the link in your Canvas messaging to join me for Zoom. Okay, see you in a minute.